People are really deeply confused about the upper chest. Here is why. If you look at most textbooks and a lot of research now, what the authors or what the people who are making these apps will say is basically that the upper pec is a shoulder flexor. Okay, so if you look at this part of the screen, pectoralis major clavicular head, it's also often listed as like the upper pec's major function. Okay, so this is what shoulder flexion looks like. If I allow this to play, shoulder flexion is just raising the arm forward like this. And the reason that people say that the upper pec is a shoulder flexor is because it is, kind of, with a caveat. So this video is going to be dedicated to understanding sort of the exceptions to this rule of shoulder flexion and why doing shoulder flexion exercises the way that people are doing them now doesn't make sense to target the upper pec. Okay, because here's what people are now doing. People are now doing like super high incline presses, and they're saying things like overhead presses are great for the upper pec, which, you know, of course depends how you do it, but in most cases, like pressing overhead like that, not a good idea, and we're going to talk about what you should do instead for the upper pec. So again, this is shoulder flexion. Let's just break this down from a mechanics standpoint in terms of like, okay, where is this claim valid and where is it definitely not valid? Because there's going to be a place here that we're going to look at that it is definitely not valid, and in fact, it will be a backwards claim. You'll soon understand. Okay, so if we look at this bottom position, okay, and we look at the direction that all of these different pecs are pulling the upper arm, this will be a rough estimate, right? The upper pec is kind of pulling somewhere like that. The middle pec is pulling somewhere like that. The lower pec is pulling somewhere like that, right? So all of these pecs have, to varying degrees, different abilities to move the arm forward from this position. But if you actually look at like, okay, here is the upper arm bone, okay, that long green line that I just drew. Look at the upper pec's line of pull relative to that, and then look at the middle pec's line of pull relative to that. You'll see how this sort of middle green line, the one that is representing more of the middle chest, right, it's much closer to 90 degrees from that bone. In other words, if you use like a narrow path and you're pressing straight forward, that middle portion of the pec, and even the lower portion of the pec, if your arm goes a little bit farther back, those things are going to actually be better at pulling the arm forward from a sort of deeper position, okay? And the upper pec, because it's pulling like this, relative to this bone, you all see this angle. That means that it's going to be a little bit less good at moving the arm in that position. Now, what happens, so that's just, first of all, that's the first thing to know, is if you're using a narrow arm path and you're doing a press, the upper chest, yes, it will contribute, but relative to these other guys, it will not be able to contribute as much, okay? And there are other reasons for that that relate to the shoulder girdle we won't get into, but just understand that there are other factors. Okay, so does the upper pec shoulder flex? Yes, but even from this position, okay, it is not nearly as good at the middle and lower pec, or as the middle and lower pecs are at pulling the arm forward, okay, in something like a flat press. Now, when we start to move the arm forward, okay, once we get to say this position, right, imagine we're just raising the arm upward toward the ceiling, the lower pec is going to start to pull kind of like this, right? So it's not going to be able to pull the arm upward in this direction anymore. But at this point, the middle pec, right, pulling that way, and the upper pec, they still have some leverage to do so. But eventually you will get to a point where you are doing some kind of shoulder flexion exercise where your upper arm is literally here. Now, what's the problem with having your upper arm here? Well, again, and what's the problem with doing an overhead press and looking at this as this sort of black and white thing of like, oh, upper pecs equal shoulder flexion. Well, do the upper pecs even have any mechanical ability to pull the arm upward from here to here? Well, let's look at this. Okay, if we look at sort of where this upper chest is pulling from this point, and I'll show this on my skeleton Frank in just a second, so that you can see it from other angles and in real time or in a real sort of demonstration, the upper pec at this point is actually pulling directly inward, okay? In other words, unlike the front delt, which at this point, right here is the front portion of the delt, this sliver right here, as well as part of this sliver right here, right? The front delt itself, because it is sitting on top of this bone, can continue to pull the arm upward, okay? But the upper chest, because the upper chest is running medially or inward toward the collarbone, from this position, it can only pull the arm inward, okay? So I want you all to see what happens to these fibers as I raise the arm upward. Okay, do you all see now how if I look at this, I look at this, I look at this, right? The upper chest now almost has an ability, because here's a better angle to see it from, it actually almost has an ability to pull the arm kind of downward and inward from that position. So, and this of course will change depending on the individual and how much their collarbone, say, rotates. Like if their collarbone rotates really high, this will be a little bit different. But the overall point is this: the upper pecs, their primary function is, in my estimation, in terms of practical application to the gym, not shoulder flexion. Because what happens when you train shoulder flexion? Well, you raise your arms straight upward and forward. And when you do that and you're using, say, a dumbbell or even a cable, yes, there will be some contribution of the upper chest maybe in that bottom position, but in many cases, the exercises that people are choosing tend not to be super loaded in the bottom position. Like imagine if you just said to yourself, like, okay, I'm gonna train the upper chest and I'm gonna do it with shoulder flexion, and then you just picked up a dumbbell and started doing a front raise, right? You would literally have to be going against every single intuition that you have to suggest that the upper chest is the prime mover and that the the front delts wouldn't be the prime mover. Like front delts, there are shoulder flexors. From this position, right? If I'm doing some kind of flat press, as I showed, or as I tried to show in that anatomy app, by the way, shout out to Complete Anatomy, that's the app I was using. When the arm is pulled backward like this, oh, again, my camera's falling. Sorry, hold on. When the arm is pulled backward, like if you're doing some kind of, let's say, flat press, okay, all of those pec muscles are going to have an ability to pull the arm forward. Again, because of just the fact that when the arm is back this way, all these fibers, they're kind of wrapping around the rib cage. And again, they do have some leverage to do that. But again, you'll notice that same relationship of the upper chest pulling close to the bone, the middle and the lower chest pulling farther away from the bone. And in this context, that basically just means that the middle and the lower chest, they're better at moving the arm forward from this position, okay? And then once we get to this position, again, imagine I'm raising my arm upward and forward. Now you see I've run out of room to contract my lower chest because my lower chest at this point would just be pulling my arm inward. It wouldn't be able to pull my arm upward. Now we still have some room with the middle and the upper chest. And so eventually I get to a point where, okay, they can no longer have any leverage to pull my arm up, because when my arm gets here, again, not accounting for the clavicle stuff, which may change things slightly, but unlikely very much, they will pull the arm inward from this position. So the whole question is like, what the hell do you do to train your upper chest? And what is ridiculous about what people are saying? Well, what is ridiculous is people are now saying wide presses like this that are at like a slight incline are not good for upper chest. And I'm like, bro, that is literally the thing that you would want to do to contract this muscle more precisely and more specifically than any one of the other portions of the chest. Why? Well, because if you put your upper arm here and you notice, okay, these blue, they're in line with these, with the bone here. This is like a parallel arrangement. The thing that would pull you straight from here to straight here is the upper chest, right? Because your lower pecs from this position would want to sort of pull your arm downward. So that's going to be energetically costly to the brain to try to coordinate contraction of that. And of course, to a much greater degree, the sort of upper portions of the middle chest will be able to contribute along with the upper chest, right? These fibers all along the clavicle and sort of the top half of the sternum, they're all going to be really, really good at doing this, right? And this is what people mean by upper chest, okay? So my recommendation to you all is to stop watching and listening to TikTokers who don't understand even what a moment arm is, who don't understand how force direction relates to these things, who don't know the difference between anatomy on a dead person or in an app or in a textbook and real life motion, and start just looking at like, okay, where do these little bands pull and where can they pull? A lot of people will make fun of this stuff, but this stuff is the stuff that will actually just give you answers if your physics are correct the most quickly, and it can inform your training in the most accurate way. Again, all that being said, the physics need to be correct, and I'm not saying I'm correct all the time, but this is something that I'm very confident about, okay? So overall, the takeaway is, do the upper pecs flex? Yes, from this position back here. So any kind of flat press or press where you're going like this, all your pecs will contribute, but the middle and the lower more so. However, if you do some kind of wide press, even at a flat angle, if your upper arm is moving toward the inner collarbone and the upper portion of the sternum, guess what? These guys are going to be the main movers. You do not want to do some overhead press or some kind of front raise to target the upper chest, because those kinds of motions are not going to be the kinds of motions that the upper chest contributes most to, because the whole time, even from here, they're trying to pull the arm inward, okay? So like adduction, if you've ever heard of that term, bringing the arm inward toward midline, That is the major function of these guys. It is not shoulder flexion because they only shoulder flex through a very, very small portion of the range. Put way more simply, stop trying to do front raises, stop doing overhead presses if your goal is this thing. Do low incline presses, perhaps with a little bit of a wide arm path or even a more narrow arm path. Just make sure that your upper arm is basically driving inward toward the inner border of the clavicle and the upper portions of the sternum. Okay, that was a lot. I hope it makes sense. Ask any questions you have below. And for those of you who are interested, check out the link in the description. I have a live biomechanics mentorship where I'm going to teach you all the principles, all the concepts that underlie all this stuff that I am talking about here. We're going to break it down, basically take you from 0 to hero in terms of your understanding of this stuff. And right now, because, if you're watching this video within a couple weeks of its release, the mentorship is on early bird pricing. It's 60% off. So check that out. You'll have 2 live calls a week with yours truly. It's a 7-week program. It's the best thing you'll ever do if you want to really understand this biomechanics stuff. So thanks all for watching. Again, drop any questions below and I'll see you all in the next video.